Hey, everybody. Welcome to another podcast episode of the Dream Big podcast with Bob Goff and friends. This is Scott Schimmel. I'm here with Bob Goff.
Hey, everyone. I hope you're having a great week, and we have got a great show for you.
Well, in the midst of this great show, the world, I don't think this is saying this too strongly. The world's in crisis. Obviously, quarantine, pandemic, racial injustice, protests. I mean, there's a lot going on. Big feelings, a lot of stress. I mean, there's so much uncertainty. One of the questions that comes up so often, and I'll say this for me as a dad of 3 kids, is how do we do this all well with our children? How do we deal with our own work challenges, homeschooling, I mean, everything that's happening to us, economic uncertainty, and then have these little kids be looking at us. And so I'm so excited that we have Brad Montague on the show today, because he is a guy that completely understands how to work with and care for kids doing hard things. He's the founder of Kid President, if you guys remember that a few years ago. And Bob, how did you and Brad meet? How did you guys become friends?
We started speaking at the same places, and I remember when we were starting Love Does, we rented the Tacoma Convention Center. We invited a ton of people to pay a ton of money. I think I put my house up as collateral for the thing. And then we put the money in a bowl in the middle, and we told people, if you need some, take it. And if you want to give some, give it. And it was really beautiful. We made our own economy, and Kid President showed up. And along with him, like Crowder and a bunch of people played music. But it was a beautiful reminder that we can make our own economy, even in the relationship, even in the really difficult times like the ones that we're facing now. And so tune in, enjoy the next couple minutes as I have a conversation with Brad.
Hey, Brad, thank you so much for making time for us today. You've been a good friend for a long time. Welcome. For the people that haven't been introduced to you before, can you give us just a little bit of your background? How did it come to pass that you're doing the things you're doing now?
I'm so happy for any excuse to talk to Bob. This is the best day. The Bobcast.
Yes, come on.
I have been on a really fun ride of getting to make things for kids, and I also like to say for former kids, because I think the things I resonate with the most, the things I love the most, are things that were true for you when you're in 4th grade, and they're going to be true always. And so we created a web series called Kid President that was about a lot of that lived in that space. It was like, what if we could listen to a kid? What would be different about our lives? And that's led us on a pretty big adventure.
You and Robbie, and the impact that you both made in the world continues to reverberate. But what do you think it was that made Kid President resonate with people so much?
I think I'll always be scratching my head as to like, how and why did that work? Because I've been making things my whole life, and we'd made several Kid President videos when we had one go crazy, mega viral, and when that happened, it was like this runaway train. It just people were suddenly taking notice that weren't before. And then I released a video the next week too, and then the next one. And sometimes people notice and sometimes they don't.
You know, there's a lot of creatives that listen to this podcast that I'm aware of. And I think people sometimes are aspiring to make the viral video. Yet I think what you aspire to is to tell the truth, and to make the truth accessible to people, not to manipulate and tell people what they ought to believe. But my belief in seeing this runaway series of videos was that you reminded people of who they were. And that's what I think that you bring to us with your this holding up a mirror and saying, remember what it was like to be a kid, not to be childish, but to be childlike. And tell us, what about that is kind of blowing your hair back these days?
I have been listening to third, fourth, and fifth graders. I've been visiting schools. And so I've been visiting big schools that look like Harry Potter would go there, and small schools with big budgets, no budgets, schools that one school that's called an unschool, went to a homeschool. And as I spent time with third, fourth, and fifth graders, I just asked them how I could be a better grown-up and what it would look like to be a good grown-up. And they would draw pictures. They would tell stories. Sometimes they would make me uncomfortable and say things that were about what they saw in us that was disappointing to them.
Yeah, what were some of the negatives that came out? What were some of the things that felt like setbacks that they commented that kind of resonated with you? Because I think we can learn.
Yeah. It was interesting because a lot of times they would, be laughing and telling stories, and they would draw pictures of what a grown-up would look like. And so it would be these horrendous monsters, like these just really gross people. And at first it's funny, like they're just playing. But then we would start really digging in, and they'd start talking about, well, grown-ups are big, or they're busy, or they're boring. And that was a theme in all third, fourth, and fifth graders in every single state, that they sort of saw that we were big, busy, and boring.
And there's other stuff that grown-ups are too. I know you had probably beautiful pictures when grown-ups were nailing it. What kinds of input did you get from them as well on the things that big people seem to be getting right?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, like that was one really exciting thing, is I started to see that that there were so many people who were just showing up every single day, looking kids in the eyes, letting them know that they mattered. And they were doing it not in big ways, but in ways that like the teachers that were there, that one kid was asked, I would give them a blank sheet of paper, and then sometimes I would just ask, just make it the brightest, happiest sheet of paper you can make. So some kids would just fill it with their favorite things, and they would start drawing foods and funny drawings of animals or whatever that they really liked. And one kid made a sheet, and it was every awesome thing in the world. And he had drawn cookies and tacos and water slides.
All the food groups, all the fun.
But then he also drew his teacher, and he included her in that list. And I showed her the list, and her response was, "Really? Him?" She had no idea that he felt that way about her, and that she was connecting. I had similar stories where kids would tell me about a family member, or would share a story of like picnics they had with just special dinners they had with their grandmother. And it's really clear how much we matter to each other, just showing up.
Yeah, one of the things that we've done in some of these podcasts, we have people that have, created, invented, filled the Staples Center, all of this achievement. I really wanted to have people exposed to some of the things that you're learning, because I want to have us remember it's not like the bigger and better and all that. It's like being fully present. And that's one of the messages. We've had a chance to speak at a number of places at the same time. It's always been fun. I actually cleared out the room. I don't know if you remember, but we filled up this university we're at with hot air balloons or helium balloons, and a couple of them got up to the fire alarm, and something about the way balloons interact with fire sensors, it lit it all off. And remember they evacuated the place, and we had all these fire trucks. I'm like, this is awesome. Felt bad for making the firemen make an extra run, but I think we just picked up right where we left off at. And some kids have the ability to do that. So sometimes we think that we've made a mistake with somebody that we love. It can be a child of yours, it could be a nephew, it could be a neighbor's kids. But kids are incredibly resilient, and they have the ability to forgive. And some of these attributes I know are the ones that you spend a lot of time from the stage to really big crowds talking about. What are some of the things that you've learned from kids that you talk about from the stage?
Yeah, well, one thing that just like picking up when you're in the midst of something that didn't go as planned. Uh, there was one classroom I visited where we sort of had an agenda, like how it would work out, like how a flow of how things would go. And the teacher let me know that their classroom hamster had died, and that totally changed the day. Now, I was thinking, oh, it's just a hamster. We'll just keep going. We'll continue, and the kids will share their stories. And the teacher really said, no, we're going to pause, and I'm going to give them space to talk about this. And it was really cool to see what can happen when you have an older, wiser person just walk alongside the dark stuff with you and not ignore it. And the kids handled it with such grace, and yet at the same time they were upset and asking some of the biggest questions any of us could ask. Well, where is he? What happened? And why did this happen to Bingo? And they're talking about Bingo the hamster and preparing a funeral for him. And I just thought that's what it's about, having somebody walk alongside you in the mess. And that's, seeing a teacher do that was incredibly inspiring and gave me an image of what it could look like to really be a good grown-up.
Yeah, these imagery of talking about God as a father, and some people had great experiences with their fathers, others had really bad experiences with their fathers, and so sometimes that can bring with it some small amount of luggage, like as much as Delta Airlines has. And so what I want to do is help our people who are listening to reconnect with their kids, and maybe even reconnect with this childlike version of them. What are some of the guiding ideas that have helped you with people like me to connect to their childlike self?
I love when you see somebody talk about their childhood. There's a certain look on their face. There's a change in the way they're sitting, a change in the way that the whole conversation takes a different turn. It could be with, because we've worked with people that were, on covers of magazines and won awards. And then when I start talking to them about, what was it, who was a person that really encouraged you when you were a kid, they will kind of begin to glow, and they'll start telling you about this teacher, or they'll tell you about their parent or a neighbor. And when we get back to that childlike state, we are so much of who we were originally created to be that somehow we forgot, or all the baggage we had, we just sort of let cover up. I think about it a lot of times as a backpack that we didn't realize we could check at the door when we grew up, that there's this stuff we just kept on that was weighing us down. And so I've found that I get nervous sometimes when I'm in a room and I'm supposed to talk to a bunch of doctors. But then I remember, childhood is this great unifier. And whenever I start talking about that, then we have this playground we can play in together, and they open up, and it brings us all back to what really matters.
And kids are really intuitive. I remember there was the Smart Kids class, and I was briefly in that until they found me out. And then I realized, oh, wow, I got put in. At the time, everybody knew this was the class where all the trouble kids were. And the teacher was Mr. Ramos. He was the only male teacher at the school. And this was the problem kids class. And it was crystal clear to me that I had been selected early on for that track. And that was my earliest experience I can remember with being put in the bad kids class. And I didn't know what that meant, but my parents knew I was in that class as well. They knew what that meant. And I wasn't sophisticated enough to put a handle on what shame felt like, but I felt like I had been categorized, that somebody had by 6 to 7 years old had figured out, like, your track is not the one that's going to lead everybody else somewhere, that they're just trying to control you so that you don't create too many problems for other people. And we can form these impressions really early, whether they're accurate or not, the impression that, oh, I'm a problem. And it wasn't.
Well, there's a story you've told before that one of the very first times I met you, we began having this conversation about the people that shape our lives. And I mentioned my fourth grade teacher, and you mentioned a baseball coach.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, somebody that can speak words.
That the way that we can tell each other who we are.
Do you see yourself as a writer? Well, maybe you don't, but guaranteed you've got something to say. You've got a story to share. You've got a message. You've been transformed, and it's time for you to get that out into the world. A couple months ago, Bob opened up a private Facebook writing group, and it went really well. It sold out within a few days, and there was a lot of demand to do another one. So we're opening up another one. And Facebook writing course with Bob Goff is available now, closing the registration at the end of this week. So jump in on it. Go to the website, dreambigframework.com/FAQ/Facebook writing course and sign up and let Bob guide you to get your message out into the world.
So here's what I want you to do if you're listening. What agreements did you make with yourself? Who is it that you felt like put you in this category? You were this person. And then are you just an older version of the category that somebody picked? They say you're this person, whether it was the bright, shining comet streaking across the skies or the dud that failed to launch. But then are you letting that push you around? Somebody said something, they spoke something over you, not in a prophetic way, but just in a kind of a, you're that guy, you're that gal. And sometimes we give a little bit too much airtime to that. And I want to talk about the other side of the coin, which is what words are you speaking over other people? Are you pointing them towards a bright future and a bright horizon? I'm not just saying blow sunshine at them, but to say, are you saying true things about them? Are you picking out things to see their potential? And I think our words have just so much power, and you've just mastered that in all the public speaking you've done to remind kids, big and small, about who they are. What are some of the phrases that have been helpful to you? I know I'm picturing that bump on the screen. I'm forgetting what they had to say. What are among some of your favorites?
There's a sheet of paper we made that people could print out, and it's a fill in the blank. It's a I am blank because you were blank. And the idea is I am doing this now because you were doing this for me when I was younger. And what's been so cool are all the stories that people would share. They would share that image online, and then they would connect with the person that wrote that. So it'd be like, I'm, an art teacher now because you let me doodle on the backs of tests. I am a mom who shows up because you were a mom who showed up. One of my favorites is there's a teacher who is a professor at a school, and he said he realized he hadn't told his teacher that he was in the job he's doing now because she told him that he was good at it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
He drove hundreds of miles to go upstate to meet her, thank her, took his grandkids. And it's just this reminder that I forget all the time. And I want to remember that we matter so much to how we see one another, how we see life, how we see who God is, how we see what things could be by just the way we talk about each other and to each other.
I think there's a huge role that gratefulness plays in all of us too. I remember a first grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Martini. I didn't know what a martini was, so I couldn't giggle about it. But Mrs. Martini was like, she was somebody that really believed in me. And so when I graduated from law school, even though I was with the bad kids class, I graduated and I took my diploma. I didn't want to put it on the wall because that'd be lame. So I found out where she was. I mailed her to her. And she's no longer with us. But I remember hearing back from her to say like, wow, you like actually sent me your like diploma. Like I kept a copy if they pulled me over sometime at court and said like, prove it. Like I doubt it. But that was just a really beautiful thing because I think she gave me not only the original of her, but her very best. And she gave me something of value, which was time. And I think that's what we can do. Even in scriptures, I'm not going to offer up to God something that costs me nothing. And so this idea of being available and present as big kids, it's going to cost us something to do this. It'll interrupt our day. It'll be being super intentional with somebody, taking a moment to say, man, you are killing this. I just want you to know. And this isn't hype. It's just calling it out what it is.
Yeah. There's an incredible guy I got to spend time with who his name's Dr. Junlei Lee, and he has this project called Simple Interactions. And the whole thing is based on research they've been doing on what affects children's brains and development. And we think that it's going to be, the giant birthday party, the big trip somewhere, the whatever. And those things matter. But the biggest thing you could do is just tie your kid's shoe every morning and look them in the eye.
Oh, I like that. Come on.
Just look them in the eye and let them know, hey, I see you. And this is who you're becoming. And that over time will change everything.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like not Tahiti, it's going to the T-ball thing. It's not Europe, it's a Euro. Like to just have those small traditions that make all the difference. And so what I want us to...
freeing for me. Is it freeing for me to realize I just okay, I can just keep showing up over time.
So the impediment isn't the cash, it's the creativity. And if you're listening, you're not feeling that creative, then check out our show notes. What we're going to do is put some creative ideas in there for you to think of something to do, whether you're with a kid or with somebody that you like a lot or something. We'll just give you a couple ideas. And there's something beautiful that happens if the underlying premise is if we can tap back in to that version of ourselves when we were more childlike, that we'll actually find a new introduction to this really high-functioning version of that. And that's where some of our best stuff would be. Hey, Brad, any last things you want to share with our people that are listening in?
I think one of the things I'm really excited about is that in the midst of so much going on in the world, there is still this bold group of people who are showing up and creating a better world for kids and for former kids. And I want to see more of those people rising up and saying, let's be better grownups and create even better grownups than us. And you're one of those who do that for me. My son one time made me go in the grocery store with our hands over our eyes. And he said they were his adventure goggles. And we were just going through the grocery store with adventure goggles on. Yes. And I thought, that's how Bob sees everything. Yeah. Through adventure goggles.
Say, what could be possible? And take lots of notes if you're listening in on the things that are happening around you. You can't see my hand right now on the podcast, but I take notes. I write on my hands. I use a Sharpie and I write in. People think it's just a bad tattoo job, but it's actually, this is my Palm Pilot, the things I want to remember. And I don't wash my hands until I've written them down. And to spend some time thinking about them. That would be informed by a childlike faith. Brad, thank you for loving people really well. You're inspiring so many of us and just a whole generation of kids, big and small. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Bob.
All right.
We recorded this conversation before shutdown. This is a few months ago, but I'm so glad we had this to pull out now, like we were talking about with kids. How do we listen to kids? That's what I'm hearing from Brad. It's not as much about what we can tell to kids or teach kids about life, but providing the space to listen, to ask them questions. There's such gold there, not only for us, but that's how this whole thing works, that we give kids time and space to reflect, to share their thoughts, to share their feelings. What a beautiful example of that.
I think what we get to do is create the safe place in our homes, in our friendships. And the beautiful thing about difficulties like this, where we're living separate from one another, is all the shallow relationships disappeared. And all that's will be left will be the deep, meaningful ones. So take advantage of that. Have those conversations with the people that you love. Become a really safe place.
And I know for me, I'm ordering his new book that already came out, Becoming Better Grownups, Rediscovering What Matters and Remembering How to Fly. And I think something that you might, as you're listening, if you're a parent or maybe an educator, work with kids, something we'd encourage you to do this week, go find on social media, wherever we posted about this episode, and share some thoughts about how you're leading your kids through this time. What have you been learning? What questions are you asking? What are you sharing with them that's been really meaningful and helpful? Because we can learn together as you figure that out in your own life.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we could even do is think of the people that make your life possible. One of the things that you don't know when you're listening to this podcast is that there's a woman named Tatif who makes it all happen. She's behind the scenes. She does not care to be acknowledged, but I just want to acknowledge that Tatif makes all of this happen, and she is kind and diligent. And I think if we can do, it isn't just saying nice things about one another, but to actually take a moment and to say thank you.
Well, thank you all for listening this week. And thank you, Bob, for your friendship and giving me the space to share some of my thoughts as I get to listen to yours. So thanks everyone for listening this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Dream Big podcast with Bob Goff and friends.